this city council meeting to order, please. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Councilmember Bertani.
Here.
Councilmember Moy.
Here.
Councilmember Panduro.
Here.
Councilmember Tim.
Here.
Councilmember Tonneson.
Here.
Vice Mayor Vaccaro.
Here.
And Mayor Price.
Here. We have a quorum. And the invocation this evening will be led by Councilwoman Bertani, please, if you would, please.
Sure, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, everyone. Let us pray. Lord God, Almighty and everlasting Father, thank you for bringing us in safety to this new day. Protect our hearts and minds with the Holy Spirit that we may not fall into sin nor be overcome by adversity. And bless everyone in this chamber and within the sound of my voice. Bless this city council to do your will, your way in this place. I pray it all in the name of Jesus the Christ, our risen Lord and Savior, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. And everyone said, amen.
And the Pledge of Allegiance this evening, Councilman Tim, would you be so kind, please?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Council reports. We'll begin with Councilwoman Panduro, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to council for this week. I just had it's been a busy couple of weeks since last time we met, and I know my colleagues, we have all been busy at events and community gatherings, so I just wanted to give a quick update to some of the things that we've been involved in and doing. First of all, most of us attended the League of California Cities Conference in Long Beach, where we got to attend various sessions on different parts of government. And so I was really grateful that I was able to attend this year and excited to bring back some of the things that I learned and talk to other folks about. So a lot of really good moments at that conference. We came back from League of Cities and went right into Tomato and Vine Festival. I know a lot of us were there as well. And I just wanted to say I was there as part of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and we were doing fundraising for our scholarship fund. So just really appreciative of everybody that attended and supported the scholarship fund. And then BMW Fairfield, is building a new building in town, and they came together with Teamworks Construction, and they brought in students from Napa and Solano. And I know it's one thing to tell students, you don't have to have a college degree, you can just go to the trades. But it's another thing to show them. And so they brought students onto their construction site. They all had on their hard helmets and their vests. And I know the mayor was there, and so was Councilmember Tonneson. And they did a tour of the site. So it was really interesting to watch them learn and have a more hands-on experience, and all the different trades were there. Everything from steel to welding, cement, the construction trades were all there to talk to the students about opportunities. So I'll end with that, and thank you, Mayor.
Hey, Councilman Tonneson, your report, please. And thank you, Council Lady Panduro.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Me and Doris were at a lot of events together the last couple of weeks, and three things I was going to talk about is the Tomato Festival, the League of Cities, and BMW. But I do want to touch on the Tomato Festival. That was a fantastic event. The crowds have really come back. It was probably as big as some of the ones we've had in the past. So just kudos to staff. I know you guys work hard. We got very lucky in that the 110-degree weather was the weekend before, so it was really nice. It cooled down right before the Tomato Fest on Saturday, so that worked out nice. And I'll touch a little bit too on the League of Cities. The training there and the camaraderie there that you get to attend. They have literally dozens of classes, and they're usually all about an hour and a half. Some of them are shorter classes, but the amount of information that we take back there and from back there and the contacts that we that we make are, it's really good and it's really educational. That's all for me, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilman Tim, please, your report.
No, I think my two colleagues covered it. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilwoman Moy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good to see mostly staff here today, but we have some friends here too. Hello to the people at home who are watching. Harry, the mayor and I and Captain Dan Marshall this weekend went to a really great celebration for Pastor Trotter of Logic, and Logic is Lamb of God in Christ Ministries. They're in the heart of Fairfield on downtown. And so they had a surprise party, the First Lady Trotter did, and it was fabulous. It was over in Rolling Hills, and they had so much food, and it was really nice that that the mayor also presented them with, it wasn't really a resolution, but we voted 2 weeks ago to include their Toys for Tots at Christmas time as one of the city's official, events. So we'll have more people there. They've been asking to have some attention, and they deserve it. They literally work every day in downtown helping our homeless, our children who need food. They're really a great group, and I was glad to see what went on there. And then the very next day at their church, they celebrated their 6th anniversary. So that was pretty awesome. And then this weekend, I went and I played a round of golf, not real golf, mini golf, and I did have one hole-in-one, and we did it to raise money for the Walk for Alzheimer's. My grandmother had Alzheimer's, and a lot of people have dementia or Alzheimer's. It affects a lot of us. So it was a great event, and it was just a lot of fun, so good. And then everything else that everybody else said. We have all really been busy. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Bertani, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. Thanks for watching from home. Ditto what all of my colleagues have just said. I will just add a few events that the Clergy Action Network has on calendar coming up in our meeting on October the 25th. We are pleased that Colonel Richardson from the Travis Air Force Base and Clergy Action Network are going to be hosting a panel in council chambers of active duty servicemen and women out at Travis Air Force Base to help us interface and establish relationships and talk about how the Clergy Action Network and the city and Travis Air Force Base can work together in unison to continue developing relationships. We've actually extended the invitation to clergy in surrounding cities all over Solano County, in addition to our Clergy Action Network members. So that's going to be on October 25th here at Council Chambers, 3 p.m. That's a Tuesday. At 3 p.m. And we're just going to open up the doors and, let folks come in who want to have an opportunity to meet and greet our servicemen and women. They need us, and they need relationships with us. So we're happy to do that. And then, again, the Clergy Action Network is in the process of planning a sit-down dinner for Thanksgiving. It'll be during Thanksgiving week on November 22nd at Willow Hall. And the Clergy Action Network and corresponding congregations will be preparing and serving this sit-down meal. It is open to the public for whoever wants to attend that Thanksgiving dinner. And I will have more details. If anybody out there would like to assist the Clergy Action Network in the Thanksgiving event, we certainly welcome your participation. Contact me directly. My phone number is 707-628-6974. 707-628-6974. And that's my report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, like my colleagues had mentioned about League of Cities, Councilwoman Pandoro, Councilman Tonneson, and Councilman Tim, League of Cities is always a good event, and it's also a chance to network with other city council people and get some great ideas about, what they're doing and maybe what we could even do better. And some of the seminars were very good. Some of the speakers were, as always, right on point. It was a little warm down there in Long Beach, I can tell you that much, but it was still a very, very nice event. The other thing I wanted to mention was tomorrow, every year I go to the Public Service Academy because they asked me to speak. And so I'm speaking to, I believe, 5th or 6th graders, and they just want to basically talk about what we do on the council, what Fairfield is planning on doing. And it's always I always love doing that, being a former educator and administrator. It's always nice to get back into the schools, even though I'm there anyway about 3 days a week. So that's it. And the last thing I wanted to say was, and I don't want to beat this dead horse, but I just wanted to ask Councilwoman Moy, I know last week you had brought up the word corruption. And when anybody brings that up, and, I know you didn't basically say who, but I guess I would ask you who you were talking about.
Mr. Vice Mayor, with all due respect, I'm just not going to respond to this anymore.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and let me just finish by saying, yeah, I actually didn't expect you to, and if you say you didn't want to, that's fine. Okay. All right. Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor, and I found the League of California Cities annual conference to be one of those continuing education programs that all elected should participate in, as well as city staff. And I really want to extend my appreciation from all of us to our city attorney for the wonderful reception that he and his firm held for all of us. And it was a great opportunity to do some networking, discover other approaches to how to enforce the kinds of things that make for a better city. And one quick note now, last Friday night, there was an event over in Vacaville. It was the 75th birthday of the United States Air Force, and Councilwoman Panduro was there. What a wonderful experience that was. And what made it such a fascinating event, they have been so busy at Travis, as other bases have been as well, that they wore their formal dress uniforms, and then when it was time to go on the dance floor, they took off their jackets, and they were dressed in the most amazing array of blue shirts, and then all sorts of colors, and what a fun time that was. It was absolutely inspiring. So if you have an opportunity to go to an event like that, please take advantage of it, because they really, those active duty reservists really want to know who the local officials are. So thank you very much. And filling in tonight for our city manager is our police chief, Deanna Cantrell. Your report, please, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I don't have a report. Whoops. I didn't even turn my mic on. I don't have a report. Thank you, sir.
Mr. City Attorney, your report, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to let the council know and public know for item number 13, Assistant City Attorney Ethan Pawson will be staffing that item. He's been working very closely with staff on that issue, so he'll be taking his first turn up here on the dais. He's been staffing your planning commission, so he's not a stranger to being up here, but this will be his first time in front of the council. We're excited to see him in action, so just want to let you know if you see me walk off for item 13, that's the only reason. He did all the heavy lifting, so he gets the credit or the blame for it.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, can I just say that
Absolutely.
Police Chief Cantrell didn't have a report, but I can tell you that as our acting city manager, she has jumped into issues that affect Rolling Hills, my neighborhood, and our residents in a stellar way. So not only, is she the police chief, she's seriously acting city manager. So I appreciate your attention and your responsiveness and your effectiveness in this role. Wow.
Thank you.
Madam City Clerk, your report, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to let people know that the Housing Services Division or Department is holding a Touch Up the Town event on Friday, October 7th in the morning, and they are in need of volunteers. Volunteers will meet at Bethel Community Church. If anyone wants more information, please contact me. Thank you.
Our first item of business then will be a presentation. Madam Clerk, if you would, please.
Proclamation declaring Constitution Week, presented by Councilmember Panduro.
Good evening, and can I please have, so this is from the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution, Ms. Patricia McKnight and Ms. Nanette Shemaya from the Constitution Week Committee. If you can please come up. Okay, perfect, that's fine. Hi. And I'm just gonna read this. And I'll have you hold it. Yeah, it's beautiful. Okay, Constitution Week, September 16th through the 22nd, 2022. Whereas the Constitution of the United States, the guardian of our liberties, is a product of reflection and choice, embodying the principles of limited government in a republic dedicated to rule by law, not by men. And whereas September 17th, 2022 marks the 235th anniversary of the drafting of the Constitution of the United States by the Constitutional Convention. And whereas it is fitting and proper to accord official recognition to this memorable anniversary and to the patriotic exercises that will commemorate the occasion. And whereas Public Law Number 915 guarantees issuing of a proclamation each year by the President of the United States of America designating September 16th through September 22nd as Constitution Week. Now, therefore, I, Harry T. Price, Mayor of the City of Fairfield, do hereby proclaim the week of September 16th to 22nd, 22, as Constitution Week in the City of Fairfield, and urge all citizens to pay special attention during that week to our federal Constitution and the advantage of American citizenship. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Just be a moment, yeah. Mr. Mayor and council members, bear with me for just a minute. I have the wrong one up, I'm so sorry. Anyway, we'll go with it. My name is Nanette Shemaya, and I'm the Constitution Week co-chair, along with my mother, Pat McKnight, with the Chief Solano Chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution. Thank you, Mayor Price and City Council members for proclaiming September 17th through the 23rd as Constitution Week. The United States Constitution stands as a testament to the tenacity of the Americans throughout history to maintain their liberties and freedoms and ensure those inalienable rights to every American. The Constitution of the United States of America has turned 235 years old last Saturday. The tradition of celebrating Constitution was started by the Daughters of the American Revolution in 1955. They petitioned the Congress to set aside September 17th to the 23rd annually to be dedicated for the observance of Constitution Week. The resolution was later adopted by the U.S. Congress and signed into public law on August 2nd, 1956 by President Dwight D. Eisenhower. The aims of the celebration are to emphasize citizens' responsibilities for protecting and defending the Constitution, and also inform people that the Constitution is the basis for America's great heritage and the foundation for our way of life. And we also encourage the study of historical events which led to the framing of the Constitution in 1987. Again, we appreciate the City of Fairfield being part of our celebration by proclaiming the week of September 17th to the 23rd, today being the 20th, right in the middle. We had a meeting last Saturday, like I said, and we rang the bells. We rang bells at 1 o'clock at the same time as all the other DAR chapters did. So it was a very lovely event. But again, we want to thank you for proclaiming this week as Constitution Week. Thank you very much.
Mr.
Thank
Mayor,
you.
could Bill,
Councilman Moy, please.
Could Bill perhaps take a picture of her with her mother and also with Doris up there? Because she's, if that would be nice.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Public comment. Madam Clerk, please.
Persons wishing to address the City Council on subjects not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the council may do so at this time. The council cannot discuss or take action on matters not on the agenda for this meeting, but council members may briefly respond to statements made or questions raised by the public, ask for clarification from staff, refer the matter to staff, request staff to report back to the council at a subsequent meeting, or place the matter on a future agenda. To speak on an agenda item, if you're online, please use the raise your hand feature or press star 9 on your phone. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes per item. And our first speaker is Jeff Traeger.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, got a lot going on at the Downtown Theater in the next month. The first event is the Missouri Street Theater is presenting Assassins, which ends this weekend. It's a bold, original, and alarmingly funny production and one of the most controversial musicals ever. The music was composed by the great Stephen Sondheim, and that ends this week. You can get your tickets by going to downtowntheater.com. On the 7th of October, we have the Solano Winds Community Concert Band, and they're presenting classical jazz on the, that's on the 7th, but on the 6th, oh, that's on the 6th, and on the 7th, boy, I never get these things right, do I? But on the 7th, the Seroptimus International of Central Solano County presents films by and about women. And musically, on October 10th, we have a tribute to John Lennon. It's his 85th, it would have been his 85th birthday. And that's, you can get your tickets by going to ftpresents.com or just checking downtowntheater.com. And lastly, the last event for our initial summer series, the great blues guitarist Alvon Johnson. And he'll be playing on the lawn on the 30th, 6 to 8. And I just had Alvon play at a festival I put on with my partner called Dhaka Bay, and it was really something. And Alvon actually was one of the stars of the band. We had about 1,500 people show up on a, boy, were we lucky too, because the next day it rained. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for all that you continue to do to promote the city of Fairfield, and especially our downtown area. Are there any other speakers, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Brian Lynch.
How are you going to forget about me? Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Council. Tonight, in this first of a two-part conclusion, I was going to introduce a young man that is driven in life and told me of some of the difficult events he had to endure while growing up in Grande Circle. He didn't show up tonight. I'd like to tell you about a couple more people in my neighborhood and district whom I think you need to hear about. On my street lives an 88-year-old man retired from the Air Force as a flight engineer. He's told me of some of his endeavors, including flying out of Saigon in 1975, saving the lives of many Americans. Plus, he endured top-secret security training, which included waterboarding and other forms of torture. A war hero? Maybe. A great warrior? Yes. Around the corner from him lives an 88-year-old woman, strong, beautiful, and courageous, and still involved in the Moose Lodge. She grew up in the Midwest in the early 40s. She and her family moved to Southern California to pick fruit, and they all lived in a converted school bus. Is that not the story of the Grapes of Wrath? She's a significant part of our history. Who have I missed? What about the people working hard every day to make ends meet? These are the people being affected by the snake. I'm not a scholar, just frustrated, disappointed, and harnessing that influence. I find it easier to use the symbol of the snake, and since there's still possible confusion with the prior snake reference, I'll continue and hopefully clear it up. The snake is made up of depression, fear, distrust. I believe the young man didn't show up because of that. Kept alive by all the heads I gave you. Vacant lots, no one in control, no one cares, no artwork, no sense of place, lack of hope. Deteriorated and irrelevant parks, signifying a lack of value and escape from daily stresses, and a higher value in buying new trucks. Messages bombarded with negative, depressing messages. Staff involvement? How are your departments involved? Oh, I meant to, well, that was supposed to be turned over. Staff involvement, you got it there. Influences all your departments. The snake influences all your departments, influences issues in the city, influences the residents. You are the only ones capable of controlling this snake with new laws, codes, ordinances, and priorities. City departments only keep it at bay. Next meeting, I'll wrap it all up. Have a good night.
Thank you, Brian.
Next speaker, Alex Lunine.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council for letting me speak tonight. My name is Alex Lunine, and I'm the Resilient Communities Program Manager at the nonprofit Sustainable Solano. With funding from the California Air Resources Board, we are launching a program in Fairfield to address the city's air quality. Fairfield, being surrounded by major motorways such as the I-80 and the 12, face a lot of emissions and pollution from vehicle traffic. In addition, wildfire smoke is a constant threat to the air quality of our city. This has led to Fairfield and Solano County as a whole to face higher burdens of cardiovascular disease and asthma. As part of our program, we're hoping to build a coalition of dedicated residents to help bring community-based efforts and community-based policies to the forefront of tackling this issue. My ask of members of the City Council and the broader Fairfield community at large is twofold. First, we're looking for local community champions who could help us be sort of an on-the-ground eye so we could better address the city's needs and to help us build community around this problem. Second, as part of our program, we're hoping to have beautification installations around our city to help make our city more walkable and green. So the ask on that front is to help provide guidance in terms of what areas would synergize with the current projects of the City Council and the city at large, and also to help us build awareness around these beautification projects as well, so we could make our streets more walkable and a place for people instead of cars. Thank you very much.
Very laudable efforts. Thank you.
I don't have any other speaker cards for public comment, and there are no hands raised online.
So we turn now to the consent calendar. Madam Clerk, if you would, please.
All matters listed on the consent calendar are to be approved with one motion unless a member of the City Council or the public requests that separate action be taken on a specific item.
And do we have any speakers on the consent calendar, Madam Clerk?
I have 2 speakers, but it's for item 12, new business.
Okay, thank you. So I entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar as submitted. It's been moved by the Vice Mayor, seconded by Councilman Tim. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. We turn now to new business, please, Madam Clerk.
Item 12, new business, minute action approving response to the 2021 to 2022 grand jury report entitled Shelter Solano, Inc., a review of its first 3 years operating an emergency shelter in Solano County, and discussion on grand jury recommendation of forensic audit. And our presenter is Don Labar, our Homeless Services Manager.
Welcome, Ms. Labar.
Sorry. Thank you.
Which one first? Grand jury or?
Grand jury. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, council members. Don Labar, Homeless Services Manager in the City Manager's Office. There are 2 items in front of you this evening. The first one is the minute action for you to approve the grand jury response as required from the grand jury report this year, Shelter Solano, Inc., a review of its first 3 years operating an emergency shelter. And then at the request of Councilmember Moy and seconded by Councilmember Bertani, we are bringing a discussion item to you this evening to discuss the possibility of conducting, at the recommendation of the grand jury, item 14B, a fiscal audit of the continuum of care funding services. So before we get to the discussion on this, I do want to provide some context for that and just kind of lay out for you what is in place currently. And I apologize, it looks like there's a line under one of those right now, but I'll walk you through that. So I want to provide just some context for you this evening of what fiscal oversight is in place currently here, not just for the city-funded programs, but as well as what's funded through the continuum of care. So we'll start with the city-funded programs for homeless services. We have 2 different divisions or departments that fund homeless services. Of course, the Homeless Services Division, which we have anywhere from 3 to 5 contracts per year that the Homeless Services Division oversees. And then also through our Housing Services Department, they oversee as well the federal community development block grant funds. And depending on what is awarded each year, that could be anywhere from 1 to 3 a year on average, depending on the fiscal year. And there's fiscal oversight that's in place with that through both the city as well as through HUD as required through the CDBG funds. So I want to just kind of give you some oversight of that. So starting with the Homeless Services Division, there are contracts that we require with our funding agreements, and right now we have, I think, 2 in place through Homeless Services, and they average anywhere from, they could be as low as $40,000 to $50,000 a year, all the way up to over $1 million a year. But what we want to make sure is in those funding agreements that we have those checks and balances in place. They're usually reimbursement agreements, so that gives us the ability to make sure that the funds that they are requesting are being used for the eligible expense and as well as what they requested the funds for. So that gives us the ability to go through those expenses before we are issuing any payments back to that agency. And in addition to that, we also track those programs and the providers as well as the participants for those through our new Apricot system that I shared with you last year. So that really gives us a really comprehensive picture. Both our homeless intervention team as well as homeless services tracks in that database now all of the participants that are entering and exiting that program. So in addition to that, we also, both in our homeless intervention team as well as homeless services, we both have what's called the Homeless Management Information System license. Oh gosh, that just went up. Sorry, it just went louder. So that also gives us a cross-reference to follow that participant, as well as not just entering into our funded programs, but also if they're funded programs into any other funded agency throughout Solano County. So again, it gives us that additional layer of measurable outcomes. And then through housing, of course, housing has even more rigorous reporting and tracking that they have to do because it's all mandated through HUD. So you have multiple reports that you're approving throughout the year. You have the additional layer of your CDBG advisory committee that does that additional layer of the approval of your programs, and then the additional reporting that has to go through there. And with all of that comes the additional monitoring and the additional reporting that goes through that. So those are currently in place. And we have the ability with each of those funding agreements to change or modify language each time we fund them. And in those agreements, we also ensure each time that if there's documents or reports that we want, we have the ability to request those documents. So if we want to look at financial statements, if we want to look at data reports, then we have the ability to do that and request that. And if service providers that we fund aren't cooperating, that's a red flag for us, and it's not likely that we're going to fund them again. So now let's look just a little bit bigger and looking outside of the city, looking at our regional continuum of care. And this is what was referenced in the grand jury report. And I specifically want to talk about this because this is a really cumbersome, really in-depth, really involved process that involves not just the actual awarding of funds, but also the oversight of those funds. So currently, CAP Solano, which you've had in front of you many times this year as an agency, CAP Solano is responsible for a lot of those dollars, and right now it's about $12 million that's been awarded to about 15 agencies. And then through the continuum of care, which CAP Solano is the lead agency to, we run an annual notice of funding availability process that's right now awarded to about 11 different agencies, and that's about $1.5 million. So with each of those, though, comes an additional layer of all of the fiscal oversight that goes with it. So I'll start with CAP Solano. For those funded agencies through CAP Solano, we have contracted with the city of Vacaville, and we've done that for, I think, the last 6 years or so. CAP Solano actually has full-time staff, I think 3.5 full-time staff that are there specifically to oversee those dollars, to process reimbursements, to do monitoring, to conduct monitoring on any of the agencies that have been awarded those funds, to do the reporting that's required both by the state of California Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, as well as the Housing and Community Development Agency of California. So there are, of course, additional reporting and monitoring requirements that go along with that. That is conducted by the city of Vacaville. And then when we're looking at our federal funds that are awarded through CAP Solano and through the COC, again, we add that additional layer of the HUD monitoring, which is a lot more in depth. HUD not only monitors CAP Solano, HUD also monitors the individual agencies as well. So where we have a little bit of independence, though, is with the continuum of care funds. HUD monitors those continuum of care fund agencies separately and independent of CAP Solano. So we are made aware of the findings, if there are any, and there are at times. That gives us the ability to provide technical assistance to those agencies and try to get them back up in line. But that is done separately through HUD. But I think even more specifically, and I think this is important, is that CAP Solano also conducts and pays for an independent outside firm to come in and do not only a single source audit for our fiscal dollars, but also a full audit each year costs us about $15,000 that's paid for through Cap Solano. And those reports are always public. We report it out every year. And any of those agencies, that's a public report. And as well as each of the monthly COC and Cap Solano meetings, each of those meetings there is agendized the fiscal reporting on each of those agencies. So, and those documents are provided for anyone in the public, and those meetings are public. So I want to make sure that you know that those checks and balances are currently in place. So for your discussion tonight, again, I just wanted to make sure you had some background, but also want to just kind of lay up a couple of things. So for the city-funded agencies, we do have fiscal accountability in place here, not only through our own specific division or department, but we also have the additional layer of our finance department. And John, I have loved working with John so far, not to put John on the spot, but I have loved working with John so far, just to really learn about that additional layer of how our finance department is really, and you've seen the audits that come through not only our independent audits where we have our own internal findings, but also just ways that we can make sure that we're doing things above board, how we can do things better, and that's how our own finance department really plays a valuable role. And then just to reassure you again that the COC and Cap Solano funds are audited and monitored regularly. And then to the question, if you do decide that you want to move forward with a fiscal audit of the continuum of care agencies here in Solano County, that cost would be anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000 per agency. And that would depend, of course, on the size of the agency, the size of their budget, the scope of what you would want to have included in that forensic audit, et cetera. So it would depend on how in-depth you wanted that to go. And then also just a reminder too, if it isn't a city-funded contract, we don't really have teeth to require an agency to comply with any sort of a forensic audit. So just want to remind you of that. Of course, you can certainly ask, for them to do that, but we don't really have any teeth unless we're funding them for them to comply. So I did provide a few different options for you to potentially consider. You may want to come up with something on your own, but I just thought this might help stimulate some conversation or discussion. Of course, there was the recommendation in the grand jury report for the county of Solano to conduct the forensic audit. In the grand jury response from the County of Solano, they are not agreeing with that recommendation. And then, of course, you could, request the agencies in Solano County to submit to a forensic audit, and the city of Fairfield could pay for that. Or this might be something that might be able to continue to be supported through the existing and future role of the new Cap Solano and Regional 2x2, and potentially expand on the scope of the fiscal oversight. So just to provide you a few opportunities or options for you to consider. So I'm going to stop talking now and turn it over for discussion, or I don't know if you want to hear public comment first, or however you want to handle it.
Have a discussion first and then take public comments, or take public comments and then public comments, okay? Madam Clerk, if you would please do.
Okay, Brandon Worth, to be followed by John Ekstrom.
Mayor and Council, thank you for the opportunity. Certainly not a fun moment to have to go through a grand jury process, but certainly I think Ms. Labar has done a wonderful job explaining what we all know that's entrenched in this, all the checks and balances, all the eyes that are on the contracts. And I love the way Ms. Labar shared the fact of all these contracts through the JPA involves many entities, involves many different jurisdictions and services are occurring in the county. And that is the grand jury report in 14B recommending that a audit occurs, a forensic audit occurs. But the city, I know Councilmember Moy, you've suggested a forensic audit in terms of with Shelter Solano. So I am doing the soft entrance, and John will be doing the second part to this, but I did want to bring, at least to everybody's attention, that we have provided a voluntary response. That's, it's not a requirement for Shelter Solano to provide we do not have to provide that response, which is interesting. The study is on us. And it's a study on what has occurred with the dollars and the services within the county. But our voluntary response, we have provided to all of you, and I encourage, if you've not opened it, to read through that. And we will be providing a response to the judge of the grand jury. I think that's enough for me, and I will give my time to Mr. Ekstrom.
Answer questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Mayor Price, City Council members. How are all of you tonight? I'm befuddled. And I'll tell you why I'm befuddled. Okay, so I'm only going to talk about 3 of the findings number 2, 3, and 4. And in each one it says the city concurs with this finding. So, a little background. I know that in the grand jury report it said it interviewed city management, didn't say whom, but that's fine. And I'm also assuming that this response that all of you are going to pass or not pass on this evening, right, is about the City of Fairfield's funds and contracts that have gone to Shelter Solano, Inc. So, a little more background. So I've attended all the JPA meetings. I don't think I've missed any since 2018. And since shortly after that, I've been a member of the Continuum of Care, the COC, here in Solano County as well. I currently chair the governance committee. So when I look at these responses, and I won't take too long, says number 2, it is unclear which funding sources are specifically awarded to Shelter Solano, Inc. and which funding sources awarded to Shelter, Inc. So the city contracts with Shelter Solano, Inc., and it has contracted with Shelter, Inc., right? Those are contracts. They're specifically made out to the particular entity along with what the services are, right? So finding number 3, confusion exists about what services or programming in Solano County is provided by Shelter, Inc. and what is provided by Shelter Solano, Inc. So I think most of you probably already know this, right? And we've spoken to the community, I've spoken to other city councils, the Board of Supervisors. It's real simple. Shelter Solano, Inc. does the services for shelters, right? We bring people in, everything you think of in a shelter navigation center, that's what we do. Shelter, Inc. has other contracts that preceded Shelter Solano, Inc., where we do housing and eviction prevention. That's what we do in Solano County. It's that simple. So, once again, I'm befuddled. How can there be that much confusion? Number 4, once again, they're confused which funding sources awarded to Shelter Solano, Inc. and those awarded to Shelter, Inc. It's in the contracts. And the grand jury received all of our contracts for both Shelter, Inc. and Shelter Solano, Inc. Don expressed what happens not only at the city level, as well as at the JPA level. It's pretty doggone clear. But once again, the city says that the city concurs with the finding. So I suggest you take a tighter read of this. And maybe it's the recommendations the city is agreeing to. There's a lot of the recommendations that we believe are pretty good recommendations. But in terms of the findings, there's definitely something that needs to be addressed there. Don talked about the audits that occur. So we do annual fiscal audits. We also get audited by HUD, right? We actually do 5 audits a year. I think I mentioned this last time. 5 fiscal audits a year, plus the additional other audits that come. And at some point, the interim city manager is going to have to put their John Hancock on this, right? So that's all I have to say. I'm befuddled.
Councilwoman Moy, please.
John, thank you.
You're quite welcome.
I responded, and I appreciate the information that was sent to me from you all, and I will hopefully get to meet with you over the next week or so and talk
Certainly.
about some things.
We'll
and
even give
catch
you
up.
another tour of Shelter Solano.
I
if
would
you'd
like another tour. The one question, I believe that you answered this in something else, but I'd like you to answer it in public if you don't mind.
Sure.
The independent auditor found that the 37,000, you know what I'm talking about. It says it was for Shelter Solano, but they believed it was for offices for Shelter Inc. Is it?
It's once again not true.
It's not true.
Not true.
Flat
So,
not true.
so
Okay.
we do have offices here in Fairfield.
Yes.
Aside from Shelter Solano.
Yes.
And in the beginning stage, we had a lot of staff up here, right?
Yes, you
And so as we did the transition and get launched, when we inherited the shelter at 310 Beck,
Yes.
Staffing up, all the things you have to do to transition. We had a lot of staff up here, so they made use of some offices that we have downtown.
So they were rented, according to the auditor, by Shelter Solano. So you're saying they were used for Shelter Solano?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Do you still have those offices?
We still have the offices, but not for the use by Shelter Solano. We've done a lot of changes.
Okay.
Shelter Solano, one of the things we did was we were able to make use of one of the portables out there to provide some extra space as well.
Okay, so now Shelter Inc., further audits will find that Shelter Inc. is paying for those offices
Correct.
now. Okay, that's good. I'm glad that you talked about that. And I really didn't have anything else. I look forward to sitting down with you. And I do know, because of running Heather House for several years, about all of these things and about the audits and about what the city does. And I will tell you that I'm not assured that we catch things that we need to, because the information that we had to give over was monthly. We did that with the county and with the city here. And I'm not saying that this is you at all, but what we had to give over, we didn't have to come back and say, okay, so we had 20 people come in, and we got 7 of them into permanent housing and everything else, wraparound services. And then, there was no follow-up after that. I was never asked again, so what happened? Did they stay in there? Do any of your contracts ask you whether your numbers, which look pretty decent to me, to be real, because this is the real world, and you and I know about this. But my question is, do you do follow-up? And is there any way of gauging that? And if not, is there some way maybe we could do that in the future to see where somebody is? Because overall, with Housing First, you probably know these stats in the nation, only about, after no more than 2 years, a lot of them lose their housing or leave again because they relapse or they do whatever.
Right.
You know those stats. And so I'm just wondering how that is here.
So we do a little bit of tracking,
Okay.
right? Not necessarily for the shelter program,
Sure.
right? Because those people go out, we don't know if they go to one of the other providers.
Right.
We can't track them, but that's the purpose of the HMIS system.
Yes, but
Right.
HMIS, I know very well about it. We used it, of course. I hope it's being used, I'm not saying by you, but more diligently around everybody. But it doesn't track very well.
Well,
really, for now.
I think HMIS actually does work pretty well. Anybody that comes into the system is in the HMIS system.
It's true.
And if they come back into the system with another provider or to get other services, they're tracked that way.
Right.
So it's typically up to whoever the HMIS administrator is, right, to be able to pull that data out.
Yes.
You know, unfortunately here in Solano County, you know, hopefully at some point it'll move to a new HMIS system that's used in most other counties.
I hope so.
So I'm not sure that that data can be pulled, but I know in the other counties we work in with the other HMIS system that's pretty prevalent, you know, that data can come out. We also know that both regionally as well as at the state level, there's been efforts to aggregate all the HMIS data,
Yes.
right?
That's
and
correct.
at some point, we'll be able to see, you know, what happens in the region, not just in a particular county.
Right.
So we could see the Bay Area to see if there's much movement.
Yes.
But historically, we've known, you know, 85% of the people who are homeless are within 5 or 10 miles of where they've lived.
Yeah, it can be. But you're right, in Solano County, we have a lot of work to do on our new JPA to make sure the HMIS is, so we oversight folks who are responsible for that can actually do it. Because like you said, if I ask for it right now, Dawn, could you get us the HMIS and tell us what, I mean, obviously, I don't think that you can, right?
Could you clarify the question?
Yes, the question is, we were just talking, were you listening to me and John?
Yes.
Yeah, so the HMIS, how well that does in Solano County, and can they kick out a report to us over the last 3 years to see how we're tracking?
Yes.
They can do that?
Yes, we
Oh,
can do
good, then
that.
we need that.
Yes, we can do that.
Okay, there we go, John.
Yeah, the difference between how we operate now with HMIS versus about 5 years ago is like
Yes.
night and day.
Yeah.
About 5 years ago, there was about 20% of our agencies that was using the system. And to John's point, probably not very completely. We're
Yep.
well over 90% of our service providers here in Solano County that are now using the system. And it's a requirement for them to receive CAP Solano or COC funding. If they're going to
That's
get state or
correct.
federal funding, it's a
Mhm.
requirement for them to use the system.
Right, so I guess I'm going to ask that we have a report like that. That would help us in the future.
Just clarify what you want in the report, as long as we're not violating any sort of confidentiality, we
not.
can provide that for you.
Of course not. I'm very attuned to it. I know how to use HMIS. Thank you, John. I look forward to talking to you, and thank you very much. Yeah.
Vice Mayor Vaccaro, please.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you, Brandon. And Brandon, I appreciate what you said about not having to respond, but you are responding, because I know we went through a grand jury report when I was at juvenile hall, and we responded because there were definitely some flaws in that report, but there were some other good things too that we worked on. So I appreciate that. You know, just to sort of touch on what the whole restructuring, the Cap Solano 2x2 committee that we're doing. In fact, there's another meeting Thursday night that myself and Councilman Pandora's on. And we've talked a lot about the oversight of the agencies and what our overall plan is going to be. And I think that really the cities themselves are supporting this too, besides Fairfield. And just to give you a quick little story, some of the smaller cities were concerned about their role in this 2x2 and can we help them. And John and Brandon actually were good enough to give the Rio Vista mayor and a councilman a tour, because they don't have a lot of homeless people there, but you know, they were hoping that we could all help as a 2x2. And I think that's the beauty of this, is the fact that we are working together. The cities are all working together to try to help each other. And so I want to thank you for doing that. They were very impressed by your facility and what they saw there. The fact that, you know, you can help them. Of course, you know, our concern is always Fairfield and what's going on in Fairfield. But I think that message is getting out to the other cities. I don't know, Councilman Pandora, I know you agree, if you wanted to touch on that too, but I know that the other cities are excited that we are working together and with the county finally, that we're bringing the counties at the table, and maybe their funding will be there, more funding will be there, more services. Dawn, thank you for the report. So I don't know if you wanted to touch on anything, Doris?
No, I'll just say thank you for the report and for the feedback. I think that, this 2x2 is really, it's allowing the cities to have the opportunity to have a voice at the table that they didn't have before, and to be able to have a better understanding of how the funding works, and for us to be able to support each other with this issue of homelessness and finding out how to fix it, but also in a physically sound way so that we are doing everything appropriately and, to the rule of law. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yes?
Yeah, thank you. I want to address, though, one of the things Mr. Ekstrom said, and this is probably to David Lim. Who actually decides the verbiage? And by that I mean where we say the city agrees as opposed to the city neither agrees or disagrees. Because I understand how the grand jury works, and in their verbiage, they're unclear on, blah, blah, blah. And are they unclear because it was confusing or they didn't get the information? So back to my original question, who decides the verbiage on what we find?
On the responsive language?
On the response, where we say we agree with, or as opposed to we neither agree nor disagree, but this is what we're going to do.
So I'll defer to Ms. Labar if she wants to chime in, but the short answer is you all decide. The response before you now is a draft drafted by staff, which is the best response from your professional staff on your behalf as to what they think are the responses of the city of Fairfield. Tonight, the city is, under Penal Code 933, the city of Fairfield, the agency, the body, meaning the city council, is the one that has to respond. So even though it's a minute approval, you all make the final approval of whether or not this response speaks for the city. So does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, that does, because, and I understand what Mr. Ekstrom's saying is where, hey, the city said we agree with, where that kind of puts an onus on you. It's like we did something wrong, but the grand jury in their report is actually very clear, and that it was confusing. They don't know Shelter Inc. versus Shelter Solano, and I don't know what your testimony or the testimony of your organization was.
They had copies of all of our contracts. That's why I brought that up, as well as the audits, where it's painfully clear in the contracts where the funding's going and what it's being used for.
Okay, so I don't, like I said, I wasn't there, and I don't want to get into a he said, she said with the grand jury, but I also think, too, that if it was, as you said, made painfully clear, and we come back and say we agree with the confusion, so I don't know where the confusion was. Obviously, it was somewhere within the grand jury. And what I would say is, you look at our response, the city says we agree, and then we say, hey, we're doing this and this and this. Why can't we say we neither agree nor disagree, but this is what we're doing, so we don't have this confusion going forward? That's all I would submit.
And Councilmember Tim, I apologize if I misunderstood your question. I should have elaborated a little. Under 9, and I think it was mentioned by the gentleman in the comments, under 933.05 of the Penal Code, there are very specific responses that the city must give to the grand jury. So 933.05A says city must agree or disagree wholly or partially. So that's why you always see the verbiage of city agrees, city disagrees, or city doesn't agree or disagree. And then the second part is, as to the recommendations, there's only 4 options of how you can respond. So that fleshes out a little bit more of your question, so I apologize if I didn't answer it completely the first time.
So then I'm limited, or we are limited, then our response back to the grand jury.
Correct. There's statutory responses that you must give, and there's a very narrow scope of answers that they require you to give.
And if the response is based on a true lack of understanding or confusion on the grand jury's part, we can't wordsmith that in. It has to fit one of those 4 particular categories, correct?
Correct.
But you could say you disagree partially.
Partially. Yeah, partially, yes.
Yeah. in that you don't understand their confusion or what they're confused about, because we're not confused about it.
Right. And I brought up earlier the distinction between responding to the findings and responding to the recommendations. And our actual response to the grand jury, we're only responding to the findings, not the recommendations. Because if the finding is in error, then why would we talk about the recommendations, right? So that's the approach that we're taking, right? I know that your approach may need to be different. There's a lot of the recommendations we don't disagree with. You know, we think we all can do better, right? But when it comes to the findings about the confusion of the financing and the services, I don't know, it seems pretty clear to me, you know, and hopefully, you know, to the city of Fairfield, the finance department, and everybody else that has to work with these contracts.
Well, that's the bottom line, and that's why we're here, because this got agendized for an audit, and if somebody is unclear or confused, and I understand that, like I said, I don't know what the testimony was to the grand jury, but you made it very clear in what you told us tonight, and I don't doubt it was the same that you told the grand jury. But like I said, I can see where if we agree with their findings, I don't know if that's a true reflection. No, it is. It's not a true reflection then on what you guys do, because then we turn around and say, hey, we're just going to continue to do this. So I like what our interim city manager just said, is we can partially disagree. And if somebody said, why did you disagree? Then I think we would come back to what your testimony was here tonight. It was, no, we were very clear. So I don't know if it's that big of a thing, but you know, certainly if it's your reputation where somebody says, hey, you know, we agree with the grand jury and you guys did this, and it's not fair, then I don't think that should be reflected in the final report. That's all I have to say. Mayor, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Council, please.
Thank you. Dawn, did you prepare, and did you do that with the help of the city manager, or how did this report, you know, the recommendations and so on? We're just trying to figure that out.
It was prepared with the assistance of the city manager.
You and the city manager?
Yes.
Okay. So there we go. We know who did it. I think that was one of your questions.
Wasn't one of my questions.
It wasn't? Okay, it must have been in my little mind. Yeah, so, okay. I was going to say, actually, that I thought that you and the city manager did a really good job. I understand now that it sounds like there's some confusion. What I think is then maybe, Mr. Mayor, if there's no timeline, do we have to get this back at a certain amount of time? We do, I know, but when's the deadline?
Our deadline to submit this is October 3rd, but if we're very clear and if there's any recommended changes this evening, and those are approved by you all, and it's very clear, then we could make those recommended changes and submit those with the report, so long as you approve that.
Yeah.
Right? And correct me if I'm wrong, Attorney, Mr. City Attorney, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just wondering if our head of finance, we have people over there who are great, and the city attorney could look through to make sure that we are not confusing things worse from what the grand jury, and speak with you about it. I think it's worth it, so we're not hurting your reputation unnecessarily, and that we are accurate to the folks out here. I mean, it changes everything if you're, pushing back on this, and I'm glad that you came up and spoke. But I think that it's worth having our professionals look at it. These are brilliant people, and speak with you and have you show, and then we can adjust. But that would only be if Dawn is okay with that, because she and the city manager did this, and they went through a process. So I don't want to step on anybody, but I want us to make sure we're approving something that's accurate.
Councilwoman Bertani, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Don, for a great report. Thank you for your presentation this evening. So, Don, my question is whether you and the city manager reviewed the contracts regarding the disposition of services by Shelter Solano and Shelter Solano, Inc. Did you actually look at the contract documents that he's referring to?
Prior to crafting the grand jury report
Correct.
response,
Yes.
no, but I can tell you that the city manager is extremely diligent in, again, part of our checks and balances in our process for the fiscal oversight. He's extremely diligent in his role before he signs any reimbursements. He goes through those reimbursement requests with a fine-tooth comb. So he doesn't just sign off on anything, it's an additional layer. So I don't know that that's answering your question, but we did not specifically go through and review the contracts prior to the grand jury recommendation.
So I think it's incumbent and basic due diligence based on the information we have tonight that how can we, as the city council, say that we agree with the grand jury that confusion exists if we haven't looked at the contracts? Because as the city attorney can probably attest, what's clear to one person looking at the same document can be unclear to somebody else. I mean, contracts are very rarely very clear. So in my opinion, if we haven't looked at these contracts, how can we, based on what we know now, how can we really say we agree with the grand jury that there is confusion with respect to these two entities and funding? So I think that's a long-winded way of saying, how many contracts are there? Did you put before the grand jury? Approximately.
I think there were maybe 2 handfuls that dealt with Shelter Solano, and almost as many that included Shelter Inc. with our various funding sources here in the county.
And you identified specific provisions clarifying the distinction?
Yes, in the contracts themselves, they are assigned to either Shelter Inc. or Shelter Solano Inc., right? And within the contracts are not only the budgets that include how much money is being spent, but the eligible activities and services that will be provided.
And therein lies the confusion for the grand jury.
Right. So it's
Allegedly.
very possible that the grand jury is confused. And if you look at who they interviewed, that's in the grand jury report, I'm sure there was a lot of folks interviewed there that probably had no clue.
Did the grand jury review these contracts in their process of deliberations?
We gave them the contracts last year.
My question is, did they
Yes.
review them?
They said they did.
Okay.
And
So the grand jury said they reviewed the contracts and they're still confused.
Yeah, and they were provided both the JPA, the COC, and the city contracts. And if I could just clarify, because I think this is important to your point, I want to make sure that it's clarified that in crafting the city's response, speaking for myself, we were looking at this from a holistic lens and not specific to the city of Fairfield. And so, to your point, I think that's an important point to make in the context of what you're saying right now, that we weren't specifically looking, at least I was not. I don't want to speak for the city manager who isn't here, but we were looking at it from a more holistic view rather than specific to the city of Fairfield, which I think is an important distinction that you're making.
Yeah, I appreciate that and understand that, but it sounds like tonight it got a little bit more granular. Because we're talking about specific contractual provisions that should provide this clarity to overcome the confusion by the grand jury. So at the very least, I mean, I think that further study of this is required, because because obviously we have two ends of the spectrum here, right? You're saying you're befuddled because it's as clear as day in the contracts, and the grand jury is saying not so much. So, the city, Don and the city manager have looked at this holistically, but it sounds like a more granular consideration of at least a sample of the contracts, maybe not all 50 contracts, but we often do this in the kind of law that I practice. A company has 100 contracts. We agree together to look at a subset of those contracts that's representative of the entire body of contracts. So maybe we can do something like that. Say if there are 50 contracts, you can agree with the city manager and Don to say, I think these 5 contracts are representative of the entire body, and that way we can do kind of an expedited but still granular look to give us some insight into, these contractual provisions that should provide the clarity. And I don't feel comfortable making a determination either way until something like that is done. We got to look at the contracts.
So just not to talk about the policy decision, because obviously that is within the sound discretion of this council to give direction to staff. Just to give you an idea of the timing. So this grand jury report was issued on Tuesday, July 5th, 2022. They sent a cover letter addressed to Mayor Price. Under the law, under Penal Code 933C, the city has 90 days to respond, which would put the 90th day on October 3rd, 2022, which is the date they set. Council is not scheduled to meet again, as you all know, until October 4th, which would put you one day past the deadline. What you could do, of course, is call a special meeting between, next week, between September 26th and the 30th to approve this. You could also, as Ms. Labar stated, wordsmith it now with specific wording that you want to insert, or you could approve it as is. But I just want to give you procedurally where we are in terms of a deadline, and to also anticipate a question. The code is silent on what happens if you blow past October 3rd. It doesn't say what's going to happen if the city just ignores it and submits it on October 6th. So I can't advise, there's nothing in the code that says, if a grand jury, shaming committee will come down on the city. I have no idea.
Is there any provision for an extension of time to provide a responsive document?
Ms. Labar did ask me that while we were talking. There's nothing that I see in the penal code that allows for an extension. That's not to say.
Is there anything that prohibits one?
No. The mayor could draft a letter to the presiding judge asking for an extension, and the presiding judge may or may not. It's up to her if she wants to do that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Vice Mayor, please.
Yeah, so if we partially disagree with this, which obviously it seems like all of us kind of do, all right? If we say we partially disagree and we continue to work on this, what is the harm in this? Like what, I'm asking you, Dawn, if we did that.
That would be up to you, the city council.
No, I know, but can we, but say if we said we partially disagree for everything that people said about the confusion tonight, and then we could work that out. Is that, and I don't know who could answer that, but is that something that we could, if we did it, and then we continue to work on what the confusion is that, I don't know how that would suffice, or I don't know. I'm just trying to figure that out. Because obviously we all kind of don't totally agree with what
where some of the quote-unquote confusion comes from.
Right.
I'll go back to who they interviewed.
Right.
Right? And there's certainly people or bodies there that probably don't have the knowledge. It's never been presented to them, and they probably have never asked.
And
and they use the word community, right? So there's some innuendo that's factored into this.
Councilman Tim, please.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't mean to make a mountain out of a molehill, because there's still going to be confusion. So the grand jury's confused. All right, whatever. What I'm trying to do, and I didn't even think of this until you brought it up, whether we agree or disagree or no finding, when you go down to what the city of Fairfield is going to do, it doesn't change our response to what we're going to do. So I don't want to create work for staff. I don't want to look at contracts. You say the grand jury was confused. We can either leave it as it is, which I think is, based on what you've told us, would be unfair to you because you weren't confused. Obviously they were. But we have to, well, we talked about it, whether it's in or not. But it doesn't, the bottom line doesn't change what we are going to do with those findings.
Right.
Correct? So now, and what the vice mayor said is we partially disagree. Well, we partially disagree with their confusion, and I think, but if we said we partially disagree and somebody was to call us on it, which I can't imagine they would, but this is California, we just say, here's what you said, here's what they said. Obviously, there was some confusion.
So,
And then we just go
if
forward.
I can interrupt,
Yeah, go
Councilman
right ahead.
Tim. I don't believe that there is confusion on the city manager's part, the homeless manager's part, or the finance department's part. They can't be confused and be paying us on a regular basis for the last 3 years. It just can't happen. You saw all the checks and balances that Ms. LaBarre put up there. With all those in place, how can you be confused? Shelter Solano Inc., Shelter Services over here, Shelter Inc., Eviction Prevention and Housing over here. It's that simple. I don't believe that anybody in the city is confused.
I see what you're saying. So then what obviously you're lobbying for is we disagree, but our findings don't change. But we disagree with what the grand jury said.
Your recommendations, right.
Yes, and them being confused.
Yeah.
All right.
Is that a motion you're making, Councilman Tim? Yeah.
Let Councilwoman Moy ask her question, and then I'll make a motion, yes.
Councilwoman Moy, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Chuck. My question is this. Dawn, you and the city manager made certain declarations, and I trust that you too, you said he is a detail person. He's not here, or is he? Is he on Zoom? Because he told me that he would be in case something came up. Anyway, okay. I'm very uncomfortable with this because I'm not going to just say that he did something wrong and you did something wrong. We trust our staff. That's why I'm asking us to go ahead, and I'll let you make a motion if you want first. But Mr. Mayor, what I'm looking for is for the council to agree that we need to know, and that you write a letter to the presiding judge and ask for an extension, and then ask our professionals to look at it, and with Dawn and the city manager. I don't like to second guess their work, and with you, so you all can look at it and see if we can get somewhere black and white and clear the whole thing. That's what I think, but that's where I am.
The city manager is on
City
Zoom.
manager. Is David on the line?
Yes, I am.
He is, yeah.
Okay.
can you hear me?
David, go ahead, please.
Okay, yeah, sorry, Councilwoman Moy, I heard you ask if I was on, and I raised my hand, and then there was a short disconnect while it put me in as a panelist, so I did not hear your question.
My question is, you and Dawn worked together to make the declarations on what you suggested that the city council approve. And tonight we've had testimony from Mr. Ekstrom that there's confusion. And so my question is, first of all, do you think that it's a good idea, given what you and Dawn worked out together, to sit down with Mr. Ekstrom and with our finance and get down to the bottom of this, so we're not sending it off with any questions? That's my question. Can we do that?
Yeah, we can absolutely work with them. The one other thing I might suggest is, it sounds like it's sort of comes down to an interpretation here of what it says, in terms of we concur with the finding or we concur with the recommendation. And so I think, in light of Mr. Ekstrom's statement there, if the council wanted to give us direction, we could do this in two ways. Give us direction to change the language in our response to we agree or we concur with the recommendations, and then we can continue to work with Mr. Ekstrom on clearing up any confusion that may exist.
Mr. City Manager, are you confused about findings 2, 3, and 4?
Bear with me for a second. I'm on a small laptop, so I got to pull it back up.
Yeah, not the recommendations, just the findings. Are you confused about what services and what funding goes to either Shelter Solano Inc. or Shelter Inc.?
I do agree with their finding that oftentimes, and this is a quote directly from finding 2, oftentimes, or often, the names of the two entities are used interchangeably. That I do agree with.
Are they used interchangeably in the contracts that you sign?
Excuse me?
Are they used interchangeably in the contracts that you sign and the funding that you approve?
In the applications, yes. I would have to go back and look, as Ms. Labar stated, since we've had this, I have not gone back and looked at the contracts, but that's what I'm happy to do. But I think, again, if the recommendations are something that you agree with us on concurring on, then I think that's a language change that allows us to respond to the grand jury, and then we can do the full contract review as requested by Councilwoman Bertani and clear up any confusion.
Well, now I'm befuddled. I don't understand what you're proposing, Mr. City Manager. Are you saying that if Shelter Solano agrees with the language in the recommendations, what are the responses going to be in terms of the findings? Because the findings are on the table right now. It's not, they've already said they agree with the recommendations, not an issue. So we're talking specifically about the findings. What are you advising in terms of the city's response to the findings right now with these issues concerning contractual confusion or the lack thereof at issue? What are you recommending?
I would recommend that we have the mayor write the letter to the head of the magistrate of the grand jury. We'll work with Mr. Ekstrom. I want to go back and review all of the contracts, and then I'll revise if I believe it's necessary.
That sounds good to me.
Me too.
With the caveat that you consider looking at a sampling of the contracts so that we can work expeditiously through this. Not saying that you should, but that you must, but just consider that strategy of reviewing these documents, but I think that is advisable. Yeah, so the letter to go out to the mayor, to the letter by the mayor to go out to the magistrate in charge of the grand jury to ask for an extension, and in the meantime, take a more granular look at the contracts to identify any confusion or lack thereof. I feel good about that. I feel good about that recommendation because now we're dealing with evidence and not, kind of the ambiguous kind of, minutia. We're looking at the documents that
Right.
are operative.
So, Mr. Mayor, can I ask just another procedural matter? And again, everything I'm hearing is fine in terms of phrasing it as a motion, whatever you decide, but thinking the next step ahead, if the motion and the decision of this council is to have the mayor draft a letter to the presiding judge asking for an extension past the October 4th, 3rd date, and the answer comes back no, then you have not made a decision on this, and we would have to schedule a special meeting next week, and we'd have to notice it within, I believe, 72 hours, or call it as a special meeting. So I want to put that in your head that if you're going to make a motion like that, maybe also think that if the request is denied, you right now want to empower staff to do something, or otherwise we'll have to come back.
I think that's to me, that's fine. It's important that we, with oversight, get it right.
Okay.
We have to get it right. So, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to make a motion to
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, to go ahead and do what the city manager suggested, and that is to have you write a letter to ask for an extension. If they deny it, then I would ask that we come back for a special meeting. I hate to do that to anybody, but it's important that we get it right.
Yeah, it would be a quick meeting anyway.
It would be quick.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And can I add, let me recommend a friendly amendment to that motion, which is that if the answer from the magistrate comes back no, and we have to have a special meeting next week, that David, you can tell me if this is possible, but at least the city would have looked at a small sampling of the contract so that we are making a decision, an expedited decision, but somebody has laid their eyes on at least a few of the contracts.
I accept that as an amendment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilman Tim, please.
Yeah, and just a quick discussion before you call the vote, and I want to make sure what the city manager is going to come back and tell us is when he looks at these contracts, if he comes back and says, I'm not confused, and it's very clear, then what we're going to say is we disagree with these findings, all right? We disagree with, but we still approve what we're going to do anyway. The bottom line, nothing's going to change what we're going to do. So now all we're talking about is your reputation and how well you guys scribe to doing what you're supposed to do. David, is that, Mr. City Manager, did I make that clear, whether you're confused, if you're not confused, this is then
Absolutely.
where I'm going, okay.
And
All right.
can I restate the motion?
Yes, please.
And have the Councilmember Moy and Bertani verify that this is the motion? The
Please.
motion, and I'm putting it in more technical terms. The motion is to have the Mayor Price write a letter to presiding judge Wendy Getty asking for an extension to the deadline required under Penal Code 933 subsection C, which requires the city to respond to a grand jury report within 90 days. If Judge Getty does not grant the extension, then you're authorizing staff to agendize and call a special meeting to decide how to respond. And you're also instructing the interim city manager to review a response as to finding number 3.
Yes. Is that correct, Pam?
Before the vote, real quick. So I guess.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Mayor. So, yeah, and thank you, David, for jumping on here. I guess what I was saying earlier about the partial disagreement was that maybe we agree with the recommendations, but we don't agree with the findings. To me, that was the partial that I was considering. But if people want to do, if my colleagues want to do the other, thank you, Pam, then I'm okay with it. But I think, I just want to make it clear that that's where I was going with this. That, maybe we did agree with the recommendations like you did, but we did not agree with the findings. So that was my way of saying I think a partial would have been good, but, it sounds like some of my colleagues don't agree with that. So just want to make that clear.
Any other comments, colleagues? Councilman Bertani?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. City Attorney, can you please read the last sentence of your restatement of the motion?
Yes. Instruct city manager to review response to finding number 3. And finding number 3 was confusion exists in the Solano community regarding what services and/or programming in Solano County is provided by Shelter, Inc. and what is provided by Shelter Solano, Inc.
Yes, I referenced findings 2, 3, and 4.
Okay, so to review responses to findings 2, 3, and 4?
Contracts regarding responses to 2, 3, and 4.
To review contracts.
Yeah, just so that somebody lays their eyes actually on the operative document and either says it's clear or it's not clear, and this provision tells us why. Maybe not for the whole 100 contracts or whatever, but just
Not
for a
that
small
many.
sampling.
Okay.
So if I may, I'll restate the whole motion,
Thank you.
given the corrections. Motion to have mayor write letter to presiding Judge Getty asking for extension to deadline under Penal Code 933 subsection C. If Judge Getty does not grant the extension, call a special meeting to decide how to respond. Instruct interim city manager to review contracts regarding responses to findings number 2, 3, and 4.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So that's what we'll do. I ask for a vote now. I have a motion on the floor. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much this evening. I appreciate all your time.
So, council, just as a reminder, we still have the discussion item of the forensic audit in front of you.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, until we get this other information back, I couldn't say one way or another right now about that audit. So could we, since I asked to have it on there, and I don't know if Councilwoman Bertani agrees, but we should get this other information back before we speak to that? Does that make sense?
Can you restate that, please? I was talking to the vice mayor. I apologize.
Oh, she was talking about us moving on to talk about an audit, and I said until we get this other information back, I'm not prepared to talk about it, and I would take it off the table tonight.
I think that makes sense.
Okay. So we have a clear understanding of what we're doing now?
Do we need to vote on that, or?
We need to vote.
Okay.
You don't need to do anything. You can just do nothing.
Okay, just direction. Okay, thank you.
They did already.
They did. Oh, that's right. My bad.
We turn to item 13, please.
Item 13, public hearing. Public hearing and urgency ordinance 2022-11 of the City Council of the City of Fairfield implementing an emergency homeless shelter program for the duration of the shelter crisis declaration, and resolution 2022-256 of the City Council of the City of Fairfield authorizing the implementation of an emergency homeless shelter program permit process and adopting emergency shelter operational standards. And again, our presenter is Don LaBar.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. Dawn LaBar. I will be co-presenting this evening, as City Attorney David Lim mentioned, with our Assistant City Attorney Ethan Pawson. And if I could just take a moment and personally thank Ethan for all of his work on this to get us to this point. As you know, with homeless services, we do a lot of creating and winging it as we go. And this was certainly one of those efforts to take a big idea that I can come up with at 3 a.m. and try to turn it into something that actually makes sense. And Ethan jumped right in and helped us get it to this point. So I personally want to thank Ethan for not running and helping us whittle it down and getting it to this point this evening. So Ethan and I will be presenting this together. So I'm going to first turn it over to Ethan, and Ethan, I will be your Vanna White and help you maneuver the slides.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. Thanks for having me tonight. As Dawn just laid out, we're going to present on this urgency ordinance and resolution that pertains to emergency homeless shelters, and primarily this permit is going to allow people to place pallet shelters, so prefabricated, single occupancy or double occupancy shelters for unhoused individuals in the city of Fairfield. If you don't mind, I'll stay sitting here as Dawn works the slides. So this all starts out of, we can go to the next one now. Back in September 2018, the city passed a resolution declaring a shelter crisis in the city, and that shelter crisis declaration allows the city to participate in state programs for homeless services, and also more recently it allows the city to pass reasonable local standards that control emergency housing facilities outside of or in lieu of the more traditional standards in the zoning code or building residential code, that type of regulation. In November of 2020, the city passed a temporary shelter program which allowed churches and other ancillary assembly uses to provide housing for up to 9 individuals within their current use. And so to build upon that program, the city has now brought forward this ordinance and resolution that would allow the pallet shelters in addition to a temporary shelter program. And so the pallet shelter program is really going to be aimed towards certain lots that don't have an existing residential use, but could be used to, has sufficient space and the certain types of cooking and bathroom facilities that would allow them to provide residential services and wraparound support services to those individuals living there. Basically, this is all predicated on a government code section that came into being in 2020 that allows the city to operate under its adopted reasonable local standards as opposed to the zoning code or more traditional approval processes for a structure or a building. You can go to the next slide.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the second piece, which is the resolution that you have before you, and that is the citywide emergency homeless shelter program permit process, as well as the emergency shelter operation standards. So this is very complementary to the pallet shelter project, and the intent of this is to, again, provide additional opportunities for agencies who really want to work with the city here to increase our shelter capacity, particularly during the shelter crisis, without going through some of that additional layers of, I hate to use the term bureaucracy, but it can be. So we've got great agencies with the best of intentions. Mission Samoa is the first one, obviously, that comes to mind, but some of these processes can be really intimidating and cumbersome. So this resolution and this new program that we're establishing will provide that additional opportunity. But the intent as well is that, again, with homeless services really trying to be innovative and create all these additional opportunities, we want to make sure that we're being consistent in the program opportunities that we're providing. We want to make sure we're consistent as far as the shelters and how they're operating, as well as making sure that we're consistent in the limiting the impacts on the surrounding communities. So as you know, we have areas that are already zoned for shelters, so there's parameters that are already in place. However, if we want to have an agency, let's say a church is a good example, operate a shelter, then we need to make sure that there's safety mechanisms in place, building code and those sorts of things that are in place to make sure that the participants are safe, and that there's program standards in place. So this will give us that opportunity, very similar to what I brought before you in 2020, which was the temporary shelter permit. Minimal impacts on city staff, and yet it actually requires that every city department gets their eyeballs on it, and there's a reason that we want to do that. We want to have the planning department look at that permit. We want to have code enforcement look at that, and police look at it. We want our fire marshal to look at it, our chief building official to look at it, because we want to make sure, again, that there's life safety measures in place, that the inspections are done, that there's no code enforcement violations, that there's limited calls for service. We want to make sure that the impacts, again, are limited to the community, as well as that the participants are safe. So this is very similar to the temporary shelter permit program that we have in place already, but this will now allow them to operate 12 months out of the year. It's a 12-month permit. There's no cost for the permit, and they have to renew it each year. So if we have issues throughout the year, if there's calls for service, if there's code violations, et cetera, that gives us then the opportunity with that renewal process to determine whether or not we'll renew it. You want to finish up? Go ahead, Ethan.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Don?
Go ahead, please.
So is the 12-month permit revocable? Can we
Yes.
revoke it?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Based on compliance with the operational standards that the team has put together, in addition to, more typical, calls for service or that sort of concern.
Yeah, and I know Councilmember Moy has a question, but before I forget, you just reminded me of another point. Councilmember
I'm Pam.
Bertani. Oh my Gosh.
I'm actually
It's been a long
Deanna.
day. I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm sorry.
She gets to be the city manager. I want to be police chief.
Thank you. You just reminded me. So we do have the standards, which you all have a copy of. They're very consistent. Not all providers are going to want to operate within those parameters. You know, we do stress housing first, but not all shelters are going to want to operate housing first, and we don't need them all to operate housing first. So we do allow for waivers of certain conditions, and again, that'll give them the opportunity to request the waivers, and again, the different departments will be able to approve those waivers. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of that too.
Thank you.
Councilor, please.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, how, I might have missed this. Are we putting a time on how long we have the shelter crisis?
That's determined by the state, correct?
No, it's
Oh,
a resolution
okay,
that the
sorry.
city passed back in 2018. So
Right.
it is up to you guys to terminate that emergency declaration,
Oh.
should you so choose.
Oh, okay, that's a good point. So it's existing until we decide it isn't.
Right.
So Dawn, I don't know if you know, but how many shelter beds do we need now to end the crisis in Fairfield?
Great question. I'm glad you brought it up. We have approximately, and this is based on our most recent gaps analysis, and now based on the information that we have through Apricot, where we're able to track this information, we have approximately 200 to 250 homeless here in Fairfield. Do we have 250 shelter beds here? Absolutely not. So, you know, again, that would be up to you at one point. Do you want a shelter bed? And until we're required by the state, God forbid, if you wanted to have a shelter bed for absolutely every person, then you'd want to have 200 to 250. But not everybody needs shelter, obviously. There's transitional housing, there's permanent supportive housing, there's other solutions available. So, that would be up to you to determine, how many you would need. Again, what we're looking for, we have our large shelter that when they're at capacity, when the kitchen is done and they're at capacity, they're going to be able to provide services for approximately 125. We're trying to provide these additional small scattered sites throughout the city. So, for example, we have Community Action North Bay that operates Ohio Street, and I think they have up to 18. The Mission Samoa project would provide up to 18. So again, these are smaller scattered sites that are limited impacts on the community.
Okay, that makes sense. I think that we should take another look over at Canby. That property can hold up to like 30. Yeah.
Councilwoman
Thanks.
Panduro, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Don, for the presentation. I had a question regarding 5D8 under operating requirements. It does list certain items that they have to comply to. So are they submitting reports, or how are we ensuring that they are complying within the year, for the year that they have the permit?
Yeah, so if they are part of the permit process, is yes, they would have to work with the Homeless Services Division. There would be the same thing we go through, what we go through now. There would typically be, if they're funded through us, they would go through case conferencing. There would be monthly reporting. As we do with Shelter Solano, we get very comprehensive reports from them. Their report card that shows the number of people served, what the population, et cetera. The data obviously helps you all drive, how you want to allocate funds and to what. So that would definitely be a requirement of any sort of permit, and particularly of any funding.
Please.
Don, did you just say we had 200 to 250 homeless?
Approximately, yes.
Is that number down from
It's
recent?
likely down from the 2019 pit count, but I'm trying to remember, I can't remember offhand. I think the number, and I'm guessing right now, but I think the number from 2019 was about 270-ish.
Have they done a
But I'm
full
guessing-
pit since COVID?
We did have the pit count done at the end of February, and that report, the full report with that number, is likely to be coming out next week, actually.
Cool.
We won't have the jurisdictional data for a while still, but we will have that full number.
Thank you.
Any other comments, colleagues?
I'm going to make a motion to go ahead.
Before you make your motion.
Oh, sure.
I think urgency is the number one word today. The weather is already changing, and it's going to take a bit of time, but we need to get on this right now. The rain and the cooler temperatures are going to make it very, very difficult for people. Councilwoman Moy, please, go ahead.
I'm just going to make a motion to adopt the urgency ordinance and the resolution. Can we do both at one time?
Do we need, I think we need to do public comment because it is a public
Oh,
hearing.
yeah, you're right.
We're going to do
Yes.
public comment first. Okay.
Okay, I don't have any,
Make your motion, please, Councilwoman Moy.
So can I do both with one motion?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, I would like to make a motion to adopt urgency ordinance 2022-11 and adopt the resolution 2022-256. That's my motion.
It's been seconded by Councilman Tim. Roll call vote. Well, we can do that without the roll call. It's all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. And depending upon what happens with the other item, we're adjourned until October 4th. Thank you very much. Good night.
Attorney Pawson.